you.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Sharon Florentine. Welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, Making Release Management Real in a SAFe and DevOps World. We have an awesome webinar coming up for you today, as always. But before we get started, I need to go through my usual housekeeping items with you. So please remember that this webinar is being recorded. If you miss any or all of it, you'll be able to go back and watch it again. We'll be sending you an email with instructions for accessing the webinar on demand, but you can always visit us at devops.com/webinars, and it will be there for you as well. Please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A tab on your console at any time during the webinar, and we're going to try to get to as many as possible throughout and at the end of the presentation. We will have a poll pop up for you. So when you see that come up on your screen, make sure and take a few seconds and submit your response. We'd really appreciate that. There is a handout for you that you can download and reference as well. And at the end, we're going to do a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So stick around to see if you are a winner. And with that, I am pleased to hand things over to Helen Beal, who's the Chief Ambassador at the DevOps Institute, and she's going to introduce the other presenters and take you through the rest of the presentation. So Helen, take it away.
Thanks very much, Sharon. We're delighted to be here today. We are talking about making release management real in a SAFe and DevOps world, and we are super excited to be joined by the fantastic Tony Mongiovi from Health First. Tony, do you want to say a couple of words about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I've been in IT for many more years than I want to count. But I've been doing release management for about the last 15 for a couple different organizations and seen a lot of pitfalls, and everybody has the same problems. Honestly, that's one thing I can say across big and small companies that I've been in. It's all the same.
I used to get asked a similar question when I was doing lots of assessments as a consultant. I said, it's like a fingerprint. Everyone looks pretty similar, and there's just like slight adjustments with people maybe having test automation as a higher priority than release automation or something. Yep. Anyway, as often I'm joined by Jeff, and Jeff is joined by me today. But Jeff, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
You bet. In terms of somebody that does it wrong and has done it wrong all the time, that's been my history. So walking through the process of release management has been really interesting to understand some of the guardrails that come along to help software delivery and seeing how to do it right. But basically, I'm on the product marketing side at Platora. We're a value stream management platform. So a lot of the things that Tony will talk about in terms of methodologies were some of the tools that enable that. We'll talk more about that.
We will. We're going to chat loads today. I love using the live chat and the live Q&A. We'll be taking questions live all through the webinar. So as soon as anything occurs to you, please pop it in there. I'm very excited to hear about all your different pizza toppings. Rachel, cheese with honey drizzle. That's quite an unusual one. And Tony says none, but he's got to explain that before we start getting into the content.
Oh, I will explain it. And anybody from the New York area will appreciate that. So somebody got it. Evelyn says cheese. To me, that's it. Cheese, normal. New York pizza doesn't need any toppings.
It's perfect just the way that it is. So today we're going to be talking about defining and making the release process visible. We're going to be talking about automating that release process and where to start and how to use it to track and mitigate the risk that is involved with releasing. And then we're going to talk about how to continuously improve and evolve. So let's start talking about risks. We've got an image here of some cowboys with some guns, the Wild West. Tony, why does release management often feel like the Wild West?
So yeah, you have a lot of people doing their own thing, making their own decisions, not communicating with each other and deciding what to do, when to do it without really knowing what the pitfalls are going to be. And you end up running into lots of problems with conflicting changes, too many people, too much work going on, no communications, production incidents, unexpected impacts, just lots of craziness that's happening. And a lot of that's just because, hey, I know what my change is. I'm doing it. I'm good with it, right? But I don't have visibility to what Helen's doing or what Jeff's doing. And sometimes we bump into each other without knowing, and I think in any organization, if you ask somebody, what's the impact to this? The people that own the app might say, oh, there's no impact. But maybe what they don't know is that a lot of apps, particularly business custom apps, are tied together very tightly. And there are implications that you don't really know. So you need some visibility across everything that's happening to avoid those pitfalls.
Are there any standout memories that you have from your career about when things went wrong? What kind of things do happen?
Yeah, I've definitely got one. I've got a couple. I mean, one I'll tell you, which is really a very, very funny, and along with DevOps, people will appreciate this. Being on a call is probably 10 years ago now, and you know, one developer says to the other guy, "Hey, can you email me that package that we need to deploy?" And I was like, "Hold on a second, where is it?" "Oh yeah, it's on my desktop." No, you know, no code management, no packaging, no pipelines, right? Nothing like that. And how do I know that's the right one? I don't. That's the fact, right? You don't know if you don't have some system to manage it in.
And you know, Tony, you've been doing this a long time. Before you had tooling and so forth, how did your release management teams try to keep up with all that was happening?
There should be a picture in the middle here of somebody pulling their hair out, right? Because it's impossible, right? It's really, right? So I'm being funny about it, but as hard as you try, you can churn through hundreds of spreadsheets and talk to hundreds of people, and it's impossible to keep all the balls in the air. It really is. It's very difficult. So you really need to kind of find the needle in the haystack and find the problems that you need to look at. And that's where the tooling comes in, is to be able to give you that visibility.
Perfect. So we're going to aim to walk the audience through today how to get to that place on the right, the finely calibrated orchestra that we're looking for, of all these people working in unison. So we're going to go through these 4 steps about how to make the release process visible and unify it. So our step 1 is about mapping the release process. Step 2, we're going to talk about the portfolio release calendar. Step 3, we're going to drill deeper into making that work visible. And step 4, we're going to continually govern the releases. Do you want to start us off on this bit though, Tony, by talking about what is exactly a release process?
So the process is going to kind of pull all of those things together, right? There's lots of elements to the release process, some that you might not even realize are part of the release process, right? The planning and the intake that goes into what are you doing? You know, what's in the release night? You know, each team's going to know what they're doing, but how do we coordinate across teams, especially when maybe you don't directly impact each other, but you kind of sort of impact each other, right? You know, lots of applications or timing, you know, based on business impact. So, you know, the process goes from planning and intake all the way through deployment. So release is not just releasing to production. Release is everything from inception to it's in production now. And there's a lot of stuff in the middle of there that you really need to consider it. And if you can't see it, you can't measure it. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it and fix it and improve it. And if you can't improve it, then your quality doesn't get any better. So
go ahead. And when you map out the process,
so here's just a sample. This is what I was explaining, right? So you got a little kind of a timeline, and there's no specific times associated, but this is the process, right? It starts from the very beginning when somebody on the business side says, I want to do X, until you're delivering in production and then kind of monitoring through. So in our organization, we're agile. And so we operate on a 3-week sprint cadence. Other folks do different cadences, but it's all the same, right? You have some number of sprints that end up into your release. In our process, we have a regression window. That's that RT start, RT end, right? That's regression testing. So you can do all the functional work you want in your sprints. Ultimately, there's going to be some regression work that has to happen. And that's kind of the gate. That's the gate that we use to say, are you ready, right? So you're ready to start your regression if all your functional work's done, and you're done with it when the testing team says you're done. And then there's some kind of review. We use a CAB, right? We have a CAB process. That's a gate for getting into the release. And then there's some window. And that's part of your release process as well. Is it a specific window, you know, per week, per month? You know, that's organization specific. You know, we have a hybrid model. We have scheduled monthly releases. We have weekly releases for things that are CI/CD. So when we talk about DevOps, right, not everybody's at that same level of maturity, but you need to kind of evolve to that. And you can't assume that everybody's doing it the same way. So we handle both. And so if we have confidence that you've got that level of maturity, then you kind of have a fast track and you can deploy more frequently.
We're going to get to that in more detail later on.
Yeah.
I just want to say there is a typo that's got through our quality control on this slide, and I was actually going to do a mini competition with the audience to see who'd spot it, but Rich Winslow has already spotted it and got very excited at the prospect of some lattes in the release process. I think they're probably a requirement to get through some of this, aren't they? We do have a question from the audience. I'll answer it quickly, and then if you guys want to add anything, you can. So Bruce wants to know what's a CAB process. So that is referring to the Change Advisory Board or Change Approval Board, depending on how old school you are, which is a step that lots of people need to go through in order to do their final checks and have the confidence to go forward. Anthony, would you, or Tony even, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the CAB is a standard change management thing, but it is very integral to the release process, right? That's kind of the final gate before you get to production, and that's where you decide if everything's ready. So even if you're on kind of a fast track, there is some sort of CAB or some sort of governance, right? Just because you're DevOps doesn't mean that you don't have those things. They just might be automated and they might be behind the scenes, but you still do them.
So another question: when would you map the release process? What are the triggers that make you sit down and do this piece of work?
So mapping the process is really going to be specific to what your goals are, right, as an organization. But ultimately, it comes down to you've got things to deliver, and you want to deliver them in more of a structured manner. To our previous slide with the orchestra, right? You want everybody to be talking together, everybody to be playing from the same sheet of music, and that's what the process does, right? The process, it's not only about being structured on a date. It's coordination, orchestration. It's everybody talking on the same page, and it's avoiding those pitfalls that happen when you don't. Right? There's so many problems I've seen in my career in releases that are avoidable and only happen because the two people didn't really have a conversation.
Right. There's another question about versioning and the help that it provides. Question from Andy is, during the chaotic period, did versioning provide any help with release management together with a process and a process owner, process management kind of thing? What's your thoughts on that?
So yes, I mean, yeah, absolutely, but you've got to use it, right? So versioning is only one part of it, right? So you've got to be able to tie those versions to what that you've tested and deploy the right thing. So versioning is real key. One of the things that I think I mentioned earlier is one of the pitfalls of when you don't do it is you make mistakes. One of the mistakes that I've seen happen, even in my current role, is the wrong version getting deployed to production. Mm-hmm. And that usually happens because we do have teams that are at different levels of maturity. The ones that are more mature and on a DevOps journey, they tend to be spot on and they never have an issue. Other ones, sometimes it's a handoff. Hey, I did my thing, but I forgot to tell Jeff that I made a change yesterday, and Jeff's got the old version. So yeah, versioning, it's critical. It's part of it. I see a comment in the chat about regression testing. Yeah, RT is a regression testing window for us.
So I wanted to bring up this standard release template, which we haven't got all 53 steps on there, but this is an example from out there of what this might look like. And that versioning question, is that a step in this release template? Why would there be so many steps in this sort of template, Tony?
So yeah, that's an interesting question. So versioning is not necessarily a specific step in here, but the steps for us, and again, this is how we chose to do our process. Some of them are quality checks. Very simply, it's you expect it to be done, but you want to make sure it's done. Some of them are security and compliance things that as an industry we're required to comply to certain guidelines, and we have certain security practices internally. Some of them are learnings, right? So you learn, right? Every release you get better, right? At least you would hope you do, right? And so you learn from your previous mistakes. So when something occurs, you might want to make sure it doesn't happen again. And so some of those steps are to do things like that, quality gates for things that might not be part. And these steps would be different. And I think you've got this later in the process, Helen. These steps might be different whether you're on a DevOps journey or not.
We are definitely going to go back to that. But we've got a couple of questions that have come through that are both role-based that I think it's worth looking at now, because we're not going to talk, or we haven't got content today specifically around roles, partly because we had a 3-part webinar series before that we'll try and link you to, if that's possible, Michelle, if you're in the background, that we recorded previously. And they also formed the basis of that ebook that you've got pinned at the top of the public chat channel, the Download the Free ebook, The Evolution of the Release Manager. But let's address first Magic's question. Do you need a dedicated release engineer or manager to actually keep those releases RTs in check? So do we need a person?
Or persons? Yes, yeah. You do, right? Because there's so many, depending on the size of the organization, of course, right? You know, in a smaller organization, it's a lot easier to do it. In a bigger organization, you know, I would consider us somewhere in the middle. We have a release every month. We typically have 80 applications in any given release. Some of them are impacting each other. Some of them are not. There's a lot of cross communication. So I have 4 release managers that are each handling a subsection of that, and those release managers are working with their individual teams. So the answer is yes, but it depends, right? So in my case, each release manager handles 3 different programs, and each program has, you know, maybe a dozen applications, and so they're very intimately familiar with their teams. But yeah, there has to be some scale, right? Because at some point a person can't do it, and it's a matter of how much you want to do, right? And some of it is understanding what's happening and the risks and the impacts and the coordination and dependencies, all those things.
And Emily's asking, do those release managers sit in the engineering function or the service function? So are they dev or are they ops, I guess, is what we're asking there.
Yeah, that's a good question. So in my career as release management, I have been part of the dev team. I've been part of the ops team, and in my current role, I'm part of the quality team, which actually sits in neither one of those functions. So it's kind of a yes, kind of a yes answer, but it you know, again, it depends on the organization. I think it's a lot harder if it sits in the development organization because they have a different charter. You know, their charter is delivery and not quality. You know, ops and quality, you know, kind of make it easier to draw the line when you need to.
Emily's in Switzerland, and Emily had her own question actually, which is a really interesting one that I've not heard before, which is, do you believe that the product owners in Agile should orchestrate and take ownership of the release process and dependency planning? That's really interesting. I think the reason I've not heard it before is because typically people think of the release process being quite engineering heavy. So we tend to talk about sort of DevOps engineers more taking on that role. But the product owner, I would have thought, would have a very active role in the dependency planning part of it. Do you have product owners, Tony, in your teams?
We do. And I kind of agree with you, said. So, I mean, I think the product owner has to have a stake in it. They have to be involved in it. They have to understand what's going on for their product. But the release process is much bigger than their product. You know, again, depending on the size of your organization, you know, in the case of my organization, a release owner or a product owner would be intimately familiar with the things that they're planning on doing, but they would not really understand necessarily all the dependencies across the organization.
Which is really what we're seeing here. So let's talk about the portfolio release calendar, because that's going to help us understand even more, I think, the coordination of all these multiple teams and pipelines. So why do we need a portfolio, first of all?
So think about it. There's a couple reasons, right? You know, the biggest and most important one is some teams are delivering and some teams are supporting those delivery teams. So the biggest example is an infrastructure team, right? They're going to support everybody. When you're delivering some new solution, you need some infrastructure, whatever it might be. But then there's other teams like that. So in our organization, we have a very big data management component. The data management team is downstream from everybody, you know, so they often are involved in every initiative that's being done on every other team. So if you're not planning and you're not coordinating, you constantly run into this thing. Oh, wait, I need to deliver this on a particular date, but I have a dependency on somebody else that isn't ready, isn't available, can't deliver their piece because I didn't talk to them, right? I'm delivering next week, but you know, as an example, there's no way that the INO team is going to spin up a completely new environment for you in 3 days, right? I mean, depending on what you have. I mean, if you're completely DevOps, maybe, but so there's that coordination. That's part of it. But then there's also the complexities of your business, right? You know, we tend to have a lot of things that cross, right? So somebody has an initiative that is being done, and 3 other programs need to implement something on their side to support it. And so if you're not doing this kind of planning, it's impossible, because you'll never get the things done and delivered to where they actually work.
There's a question from Brennan that I think is going to resonate so strongly with you and is so closely related to what you just described. So Brennan's saying, my biggest problem is that even with a very late freeze date, I have product owners who continue to request new changes be added to release late in the process, even past the freeze. What tips do you have on herding all these cats so we can really get frozen and system integration tested with all the changes complete?
Yeah, that's a really good one. You've got to do it earlier. So the freezes are important, right? And that the structure of that timeline that we showed is really important. So Helen, if you could go back 2 slides to the timeline.
One moment. Sorry, I was having a slurp of tea.
The time to freeze, the time to freeze is much earlier. So you know, I'll tell you what I do, right? So at the regression window, right? In our world, regression is for the things that are done and ready, right? So we're agile, right? You're building things, you're ready to go. That means your functional testing is done. So our freeze is at the start of the regression window. So we have a 2-week regression window. Could be different depending on your organization. You know, we're constantly reducing that. That's where our freeze is. So we're at that point, we're 3 weeks out from the release. So that's where we start asking those questions and pushing back and saying, no, this is new. And then you need some gates, right? So in our world, and this is to Helen, your question earlier about the process, right? Without having a process, the situation I used to be in, right, was a couple days before the release, oh my gosh, we need more time because this stuff got added and we didn't know, and now we need more time to test, right? So you want visibility into when that stuff is getting added. So I can tell you at the start of regression what's in scope. So that's where we lock our scope. So we literally have a scope lock phase that we do, and it's something that we do within our tool set. And from that point on, my release managers have visibility to everything that gets added. So if Jeff adds a story tomorrow, I get an alert. And then as the release manager, I reach out to my partner and I say, what's going on? What is this? Do we need it? You know, what's the impact? How's it going to impact the release? And so we ask all those questions, so you have some time. So it's really doing it early and getting visibility. Otherwise, you're in the fire drill mode. So, you know, it's off the screen now, so I can't see who asked that question, Helen.
Brennan,
I empathize with you. I've been in that situation, and it's no fun, and it makes you crazy. So to solve that, we've done a couple of things. You know, we managed the scope lock, and the other thing is we would always have people coming in with content and asking for more time, right? So what we started doing was tracking that. Or really, you know, okay, you need more time. Do we have it? If we have it, we give it to you. But why, when, how, and just really categorizing that, and then going back and chipping away. And this is the measure it and fix it part, right? So I can measure how many times people are asking for more time and how many times Jeff does it specifically. So I can go back and say, Jeff, you've got a problem we need to fix. You always have this problem. It might be within Jeff's control. It might be outside. But once you know what those reasons are, you can start chipping away at them and improve your process. And that's where we are now in our journey.
That's right. And usually it's Jeff creating the problems. You know, along those lines, you know, one of the things, Tony, I've always heard you say is, you know, hey, I'm a tool vendor. And as a tool vendor, we provide tools to help you with this. One of the things I know we've talked about, Tony, is, man, if you had to manage all this stuff manually, managing the process of scope blocking would be really, really challenging. And now that you have more tools to manage the regular process, you can focus on the exceptions. And so the biggest piece of advice there is you need a tool so that you can just focus on the problems that are coming. By all means, Brennan, come talk to us. You know, we can show you all how it's done.
And so, you know, Brennan, as an example, right? So we have a release coming up in 2 weeks after Labor Day. And at the start of the regression phase for us, we had 780 user stories in that release. Our regression window ends today. We have 705, right? So why is that important? Well, things got de-scoped because they weren't going to make it, but the only reason we were able to do that is because we had the visibility. We knew what was in. There's also a fair number of things that came in late and then some got accepted, some didn't get accepted. But yeah, Jeff, to your point, it's impossible with that much volume to really see everything. So what you have to be able to do is look for the exceptions and look for the needles in the haystack, look for the ones that need attention. As an example, in where Brennan's talking here, the situations I've been in the past is we know that we're doing something, we know an application's being touched, but I can't really tell the difference between something that's on track and off track and something that's big and something that's small. That's where you want visibility, right? So one of the things that I can do now with the tool sets that we're using is I can see the difference between an application that's making a really, really small change and an application that's making a major change. And then I can focus on those, right? So when I say we have 80 applications in the release, that's true, but there's probably 10 of them that I really care about because the other 70 are really, really small changes.
Takes data to know that.
Takes data. Data-driven decisions is really made my life a lot less stressful.
So just a couple more questions on the calendar. One is, who owns the calendar and how do teams access it?
So yeah, that's a good question, and I have two different answers for that. So there is a planning cadence that every organization is going to have, and that's going to be more across the organization, right? So whatever team, whether you've got a PMO or some other planning organization, that team is probably going to own that. But calendar-wise, I think it's the release management side. So for me, I own the release calendar and the sprint calendar. Everybody else is doing all this work that you've shown here. Everybody doing their planning aligns to sprints, and then those sprints align to releases. There's some flexibility. It's not black and white, right? You have to be flexible to support the business, but at the same time manage the risk. And so that's where the calendars come in. So in my world, we've got sprints. We've got 3-week sprints, and I know that the sprints have to start before or have to finish before you start your regression. Otherwise, how could you possibly know that work is done? So you have to apply some logic to it, right? And work with teams on that stuff. But the calendar is hugely important.
And I think this will help answer some of the questions that we've had from the audience about that calendar. So we've had some people, why sprints? Have you tried to untie yourself from forced cadence events? Are you bound by some kind of strict release dates or whatnots? And quite a lot of lively chat in there. And I think what's important for people to understand is that people are on a journey, organizations are on a journey from a place where it has been that Wild West. It's completely chaotic. We have very complex system environments with lots and lots of dependencies. And we're trying to get to another place. But while we get from one to the other, there is the travel, and we don't just immediately switch off all these dependencies between our systems and reduce all of those risks about one team making a change without another team knowing about it. So ultimately, while we'd like to be in a place where all teams have full autonomy from a system perspective and from a work perspective to perform their own releases on demand, the reality is that a lot of organizations are simply not coming from that place, and it's a lot of work to get to it. So enough from me. Tony, if you were to take all of your teams and sprinkle them across this curve in terms of where they are, in terms of how often they're able to release and how much autonomy they have, would it look like a scattergram? Would you have different people or different teams at different stages?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I would say there's probably not a lot that are in the every 6-month cadence in our world, because we've embraced Agile. Probably we're 5 years into an Agile journey now, and we do Agile pretty much across the board, and not just for software development, pretty much for everything that we do as an organization. So everybody's kind of thinking along that mindset of delivery and delivering things in small pieces. So there's deliveries happening more often. I would say most teams, probably 75% of everybody delivers on a monthly cadence. And we only have one team right now, maybe two, that are delivering on a sprint cadence. and nobody is quite to the on-demand. And that's just a maturity thing, right? So we'll get there. We will be our mobile app. So one of the things that the pandemic did for us on a positive note was we have a mobile app that was scheduled to be done sometime, I don't know, sometime in early 2020, I guess. And we moved it up by about 6 months, at least, because of the pandemic. But one of the reasons we were able to do that is because that team is more mature. That team started out with a DevOps mentality. And so they're releasing on sprint. And that's one of the things that forced me to kind of mature the release process a little bit. So we've got confidence on their DevOps pipeline. And we know that things that come out of that are builds are automated, deployments are automated, regression is automated. So they can essentially release any week, once a week. They tend to do it on a sprint cadence, but they have the green light to release every week if they want, because we have a high degree of confidence and low risk. But it's across the board, Helen. There's some teams that are really, probably less than monthly and are really highly manual and have a lot of problems with their releases because of dependencies. And their releases take a long time, like days, a long time.
Yeah, indeed. Let's do a poll and see how the audience is in terms of those capabilities. So while we've got that poll running, I'm just going to leave it there running in the background. Let's have a chat about this iceberg, what we can see and what we can't see. So we've talked a bit about making work visible already. You've talked about if you can't see it, you can't measure it. And if you can't measure it, you can't fix it to improve it. We've also talked a little bit about how to make the work visible. So we've talked about mapping the process. We've talked about having a portfolio release calendar that is available for people to see. We've actually also talked about having version control as well. But are there any other components, Tony, that make work visible?
Well, I mean, I would add one thing to this. This is a really awesome slide, and I use this analogy a lot when I talk to folks. This is one of the reasons you have the calendar. So if you think about your organization, and I'll talk about ours. Our infrastructure and operations team is constantly doing stuff to improve our ability to deliver and improve our environment. They're probably the reason that we were able to go through the pandemic with almost zero impact with everybody moving remote, because they had been doing things in advance. But if you look at that, somebody will say, and for people on here, I don't know, Brennan and some other folks that people are doing this kind of job. Oh, my application doesn't impact anybody else. Well, okay, that might be, or maybe not, or maybe they impact you, right? So, classic example is I&O. The environment in any organization tends to be very unstable when I&O teams are doing their work, and that's no discredit to them or to what they're doing. That's just the nature of what they're dealing with. So the environment's unstable. So, if Jeff goes ahead and does something, in his Wild West with his cowboy hat on, and he doesn't know that the I&O team is doing something, or maybe they're making a major network change and they pull the rug right out underneath Jeff, and who knows what the impact is to that happening. So you really want the visibility to who's doing what and when in order to make those decisions. Again, data-driven decisions. So the calendar is one, but knowing the granularity of what's happening at what time lets you avoid the iceberg.
Very nice. Let's close that poll. So we asked the audience where they are on their journey. Good news is the majority, 32%, release every sprint. It would be better news if the majority released on demand. That's about 21%. It was multiple choice. I should have mentioned that, so people who hopefully they figured it out, they could pick multiple things. But we only had 2% that felt that release was like breathing, whereas 13% felt like their hair is on fire. Only 8% releasing every 6 months. Still 25%, a quarter of the audience releasing every quarter. So that variation we just talked about is very much there, as we can see in the poll. Anything else we want to say about this iceberg? I think one of the things was we were talking about how impossible it is to look across the hundreds of spreadsheets. Did we talk about that just now, or did you want to drill into that a bit more, Tony?
We talked about it a little bit, but I can certainly drill into it. So, for the folks on the call, anybody that's really got a mature DevOps pipeline, you probably don't need spreadsheets, although there's in the in the real world, unless you've got a new application that you've architected to specifically be delivered as a microservice or on a pipeline, you probably have some relationship to other things that have to go. So there are other steps that have to go. You know, it's not often that you have just, you know, point and click and go. So when you're in the manual mode, which again, we're probably 75% of our stuff is still manual, everybody's got a plan. Right? And everybody's plan, most companies in multiple organizations I've been in, most people use Excel or some form of that. So when you've got a lot of different things going on, how do you look across all those to find conflicts and dependencies and impact? It's virtually impossible. I mean, you can do it, but it will drive you crazy looking at all the spreadsheets and trying to figure out what it is. And that's where the tools come in. So, you know, we've taken an approach where we essentially have a database, a system of record that has all of our planning in it. And I can pretty much in about 3 minutes, if somebody comes to me and says, oh no, you know, this is really important, I need to do this on this day, I can look and say, okay, hold on, let me find you a window where there's nothing else going on. And I can do that because it's data. It's just data. But if you try to have a person do that analysis, you know, first it's flawed, regardless of how good the people are. It's impossible to keep all those facts. And the second is it takes a long, long time.
And you know, as a vendor, it's like there's nothing that actually makes nothing makes me happier than knowing that as a vendor, I can come in and put a tool here and essentially eliminate the meetings with 50 people in a room that are there for a half day. You just don't have to do that anymore. All that data can just come automatically.
Jeff, I'll tell you guys a real life example. This is a real example, happened about 3 months ago. You know, we have our monthly release. We had, our releases typically go Wednesday through Saturday. And we had AWS contact us on Monday and said, oh, by the way, we're doing this maintenance on Thursday night.
Yeah, good luck.
It impacts you guys.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were, you know, scrambling to figure out what do we do, right? So I was able to look. I mean, literally in less than 5 minutes, I was able to say, okay, what's going on between those hours? And I found the 6 applications that were impacted, and we looked at them, and only one of them had an AWS impact. So now 5 of them were out. One of them we had to look at, and we said, hey, can we move you guys a day earlier or a day later? We did, no problem. And there was no issue averted. But I was only able to do that because I was able to literally sift through 750 discrete deployment activities and find the half a dozen things that had a conflict.
By doing a search that gave you an instant response. I mean, this is you not going through a spreadsheet. So when you say sifting through, I'm assuming it was quite a quick way to get that data.
It was a quick query. It was a simple view on a Tableau report.
Yeah, perfect. Let's talk about guardrails. What's a guardrail, Tony? Why do we need them?
To protect you from yourself is one. But I mean, and in all seriousness, it's true, right? Because you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know all the other things that are going on, and also to keep us on the straight and narrow. Some of it's compliance related, right? You don't want to ever have those red flags, right, on compliance for something silly, and you know, for the change process as well, right? You want to be true to it, and you want to do things, but you also want to prevent issues, right? Some of the guardrails are to prevent missing things. Hey, did we do this? You know, sometimes it's a simple question, and the answer might not be what you want, but at least you know before you go into production that you forgot something, or that you have something else. And it allows you to manage by exception. Hey, which are the ones that are a problem? Which are the ones that really are not ready? It kind of lets you look at that readiness discussion without, without sticking your finger in the air and hoping you know which ones which ones are not ready. And, you know, again, maybe it's an administrative issue, maybe it's a simple thing, but at least you know where to look to find the things that might cause you trouble later.
And let's talk about those trouble spots. So I'm going to say to those guys, remember this, we saw this earlier, it was our 50-odd step process. Let's talk about this though, certifying people to go fast. So if we've got those guardrails in place, so we are asking the right questions and checking the right things, what does this tell us about the kind of interventions and improvements that people can make to go faster? What are we seeing here?
So I, as well as probably everybody else on this call, right? People always want to go faster. They want to deliver faster. And so my answer is always, okay, get here. So get the maturity, build the pipeline and get to where we have confidence in the pipeline. So what this is all about is you're building your pipeline on the left-hand side. And then, so we have an onboarding process. It's really simple. You want to use the pipeline, we get you the tools that you need to do it. And then when you get to a point of maturity where the testing team says, yeah, we're not doing manual testing. So I'll give you an example. For our mobile app, the only manual testing we do are things like biometrics, things that you really can't automate. Everything else is automated. And so when you have the confidence and the QA team is willing to sign off and say, hey, I'm confident that anything that comes out of this pipeline has been tested and can go to production, and we track it and we kind of give you a pass to go. And now as part of our process, instead of a human looking at everything that comes through, we've got some tools that do it and basically say, oh, you're changing that app. Okay, that app is certified to go. Okay, just go. You can go whenever you want. It just goes through a normal process. And if it's not, then it puts a stop sign up and we have a conversation and say, okay, well, you're really not ready for this, but here's when you can go. Here's the other releases. So it's really about readiness and confidence and risk management. And once you have that, you can go a lot faster. And of course, there's still some level of governance. And this is something I'll say. I don't know, Jeff, if you'll agree with me on this, but my belief is that DevOps doesn't mean no process, no governance. DevOps just means being smarter about it and being more streamlined about it. And so we've implemented our processes in a way that we have very few gates for things that go through the DevOps process versus things that go through the normal cycle.
Mm-hmm.
DevOps does definitely not mean no governance, for sure. You mentioned onboarding there. We've got a question from Anna, which is, how do you handle the training related to releases? In our organization, release training is a big lift. Increasing the release cadence puts an additional burden on the training team. Do you have a training team, Tony? And if not, why not?
So I missed the beginning of that question. Onboarding for releases? You mean for DevOps?
You mentioned onboarding teams onto the pipeline, and it got me. It kind of aligns a little bit to Anna's question.
So I'll answer that specifically, and then if there's a follow-up question, I guess. So onboarding is a couple prongs. So the first part is we do have a team. We call them our DevOps enablement team, right? And they sit under the infrastructure and operations group, but their job is not only to build the pipelines, but when they onboard somebody on the pipeline, what that means is, okay, your application has a structured repository, and it's done in a way that it works with the pipeline. So we've built the pipelines based on different technologies. We have a lot of different technologies, like most companies that we use internally. So there's different pipelines based on what you're doing. But so to onboard means you've got code management, you've got CI, so you can do your builds. We've got a deployment process so that's all part of the onboarding, as well as you're engaged with the right teams to automate your testing, because you're not really going to get back to that previous picture. You're not going to get the approval to go through that pipeline until you have the full end-to-end, meaning you have your regression automated. So in our world, that's a very, very strict and specific designation. So I've had people come to me and say, "Hey, I've got CD. Can I go every week?" I'm like, "Well, who's doing your testing?" "Oh, well, Jeff does it." Okay. Well, once Jeff automates that, we can do it, and we work together, and we try to get that process done. So the onboarding is all of those things. It's giving the development teams the tools to be able to build their apps, and then having the test team automate it.
So I think in a roundabout way, we're kind of saying that you don't have a training team per se. You've got a DevOps enablement team, and it's more of an ongoing, continuous collaboration between those teams to get people onboarded in order to put the right foundations in place to get that cadence accelerated. And I think this tells us a little bit more about that. So we remember this. We saw our 50+ step We've talked about how to onboard people into the CI/CD world. And this is what it enables us to do. Suddenly, we've reduced our number of steps quite significantly. Tony, what sort of steps do we lose, or in a good way? Where's the waste being removed? What's changed?
A lot of the oversight has changed, because a lot of the steps, if you go back to the previous one, a lot of the steps are oversight. And even in this last one, there's a lot of the things are on the release team just to make sure the communications are happening and things like that. But there's a lot less oversight, right? Because of this pipeline that you have, right? You've got a certain amount of trust that things are solid, and so you don't have to look and check and do any of that coordination and ask the questions, and it's all happening because they're coming through the pipeline. I saw a question about, and the word that jumped out at me was big bang. So it's really, the releases. I wouldn't say that our releases are big bang, but I understand the question. But there's a certain level of maturity to get to that, delivering on sprint and a release, versus a single application versus an enterprise view. So we've taken the enterprise view because our ecosystem is very tightly coupled. Even when the applications don't directly impact each other, they do from a business perspective. There are impacts that are not necessarily seen. So it is important to have that orchestration.
Talking of orchestration, there are a lot of tools, aren't there? So how do we connect all these parts of the tool chain, and what role does Plutora play there? Specifically for us, Helen, is that your Yes.
question? Yeah. So yeah, there are a lot of tools. I mean, we might have taken a different approach with Plutora, I don't know, Jeff, than some other folks, but we started off Plutora as the thing to help us understand the flow of things going into a release. And now we're working on orchestrating the back end, which is how it integrates to our pipelines. So we looked at a couple different tools several years ago, and decided ultimately on Plutora. But Plutora helps us. I mean, for the most part, if you look on the left-hand side, ServiceNow, ALM, and version 1, those tools were in play for many years now, for 4 or 5 years, right? Those are the tools that we've used, and they all have their own purpose, right? So version 1 is intake and planning, and that's our agile process, and that's what we do, that's what we use, and it continues to be the source of truth for all that stuff. ServiceNow is the governance and the release records and all that stuff. Again, source of truth, and ALM is for our testing. But you've got different things happening at different times in different systems. So somebody that's planning something in version 1 ultimately wants to get to production. So back to a comment I made earlier, in the past, somebody was doing a release and I knew about it when they finally put a change record in ServiceNow, but I couldn't really tell the size or the scale, or my hair was on fire at the end of the line because things were coming in late. And so the way that we've approached it is we've integrated these tools in a way that we have the visibility of the pipeline coming in from version 1 all the way through to ServiceNow. So I can see whether it's 1 story or 1,000 stories that somebody's delivering, and I can see the timeline. So I was talking earlier about the idea of scope blocking a release. That happens in ServiceNow. That happened before we ever had Plutora. It's something that we do, but prior to Plutora, all I could do was know if somebody wanted to create a new change, but I wouldn't know any more of the details. Now I can see Plutora plays traffic cop for me, right? Plutora sees the story. So, to Jeff's point before, how do you look at all the spreadsheets? We have literally over 700 user stories in the current release. For one person to look at every one of those and to be able to figure out whether it's good or not good is really difficult. But for a system, it's really easy. So Plutora sees it come in and says, hey, ServiceNow, what's the status of this? Oh, that release is locked. Okay, you can't go. And it just puts up a gate essentially, and then the release managers handle the exceptions. Hopefully I answered your question, Helen.
Yeah, absolutely. So with all these changes happening in the background, with all these different tools and things, we're seeing the role of the release manager change. And Michelle very kindly put a link in the chat to those previous webinars. And of course, you do have the evolution of the release manager document pinned in the chat channel as well. But if you were to pick one of these things, Tony, what do you think is the most significant change that you've seen to your role over recent years because of these adoption of DevOps and cloud in order to support digital transformation?
I mean, I would say that the number one is probably the first one. Instead of being a gatekeeper and a bouncer, they're more of an enabler for delivery. And we've, at least my release managers on my team are more enabling delivery and figuring out how to do it in a way that is safe and not impacting the organization. So, back to my point before, I had one example I used about AWS, but that happens all the time, where somebody will come in and say, hey, I've got this really critical production incident and I need to fix this tomorrow, and it'll be ready to go. And we're in the middle of a major release and we've got 80 applications changing with 750 different things being done. When is a good time to do it? And so we can find that pretty easily and quickly now. So that's where my team becomes the enabler. And it's not about saying no, it's about saying, hey, here's the best way to do it where you're not going to impact anybody else, or vice versa.
Perfect. So we have walked through how to map the release process, why we've got a portfolio release calendar, how to make that work visible, and finally how to continually govern those releases. So this is all possible. We have our DevOps tool chains and our CI/CD pipelines. So we have all this data. Tony's made the point a couple of times that we need to be data driven. But at the Value Stream Management Consortium, we did some research and released the first Value Stream Management or State of Value Stream Management report back in mid-July. We'll try and put a link to that in the channel in a minute as well. And what we discovered is that only 5.6% were using a single tool that they had bought. And this is quite significant if we look at research from people like Gartner, who forecast that 70% of all organizations will be using a VSMP or a Value Stream Management platform like Plutora by 2023. So a lot of people are still over here. They're doing manual collection. They're aggregating themselves from several sources, but not connecting the dots to get figures on flow. Or they've done tools integrations themselves, which is a huge overhead. So, Jeff, do you want to pick us up from here and tell us what your reaction was when you found this research?
Well, the big number of that is surprising to me is how much of this is done manually. You would think in the world where we're worried about vaccines having microchips and so forth, we would not be sitting here wondering about flow that's being manually collected. My goodness, we have technology that can do this so easily. And so I'm surprised that we are still trying to do some of this collection manually. So if you're not a member of the consortium, by all means, get over there, join. It's free to join, download the research, because there is a difference between the high-performing teams that actually watch and monitor flow and those that don't. But yeah, that was the biggest surprise to me, is how much is just manual activity again. Tony, I love this story because it emphasizes where and what people can do without waiting until being completely re-architected, completely automated pipelines, completely automated testing. And even that world, how much chaos there is with the various teams self-directing the kinds of work that they're doing. How do you keep your arms around it? How do you do that without having a massive team and tons of meetings and ending up as these huge gatekeepers that you never really know what's going on? Well, ta-da, enter a tool. Gosh, if only we had a tool that helped you with this process. We do. When we were talking about having a global release calendar, that's really easy to set up. Just what Plutora is we're a value stream management platform. We manage value streams. We templatize the releases themselves so that you can attach various versions of the releases. And maybe there's one that's more CI/CD focused. Maybe there's ones that are more standard. Maybe there's all points in between. You decide and let people attach to those templates. And then everything else at that point is managing by exception. So following that journey, the first thing you'll do is create and manage a schedule. And you can have people put things on themselves, or you can define blockout periods to where we don't want anybody deploying over the Christmas time. Or I remember one time, Tony, you told me about, well, gosh, open enrollment. We don't want people having major changes during that time. And you can manage this process where you can have visibility to every single release that's going through the pipeline. There was a question on the chat about, well, what do we do about all these patch releases and how do I get my arms around it? You're going to need a tool. please, if your hair is on fire and you're struggling, come talk to us.
Hey, Jeff, just a quick point on that open enrollment thing, right? So this is really a really big one. So we do, you know, we're an insurance company, so everybody's, you know, who here has insurance, and you know that that's a critical time, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I can tell you really specifically, it was last summer, so you know, summer of 2020, right around the beginning of August, I was looking at data, just looking at a dashboard, and I saw this huge release. There's a couple applications that a major amount of work going in, like literally hundreds of user stories, and it was in our enrollment and billing area. So I was able to go over to that team and said, hey, this is during or just leading up to open enrollment. Do we really want to do this now? Does it really have to go now? And it spurred a good conversation, and ultimately they moved it, and they agreed, and they said, you know what, we're going to move it to November or whenever they moved it to. But I was able to see that 2 months in advance without having a you know, oh no moment in production when suddenly something blew up.
Precisely. I've also heard this described as being an analogy of chairlifts going to the top of the mountain, you know, for those skiers, and pick any chairlift you want, but there's got to be some management around when those chairs are going. You don't want to overfill them. You want to make sure there's a good cadence. You want to make sure that they're going in the right place and that everything's done. You have to have some visibility for it to make that happen. Well, once you define your trains going to the station, your chairlifts, or what you want to call it, you now need to monitor and manage the process. Well, goodness gracious, late breaking changes, progress on delivery, is it going to make it in time? All this, you're just not going to have time to manage each one individually. You have to transform into letting a tool manage the majority of it and managing the exceptions so that you can spend time focusing on those areas that are. This is where Platora comes in again. We can manage the compliance against the process. We can have the activities done. You can distribute this out and get up-to-date status checks. You can see even when there are changes that are late breaking coming in, and actually have a process around stopping those, blocking those, bumping the next one, giving you the data that you need so that you can manage the process. As part of that, you also, Tony, you mentioned about being able to see, oh, I can see where an application or a system is having a large number of changes, and I can see by which release. One of the views we have is an impact matrix, and it will show the different applications and how many different releases are actually trying to impact the same one, and give you some identification around where's my problems going to be. Gosh, if I've got one area that I've got a whole bunch of stuff around, I know I need to spend a little extra time there to make sure things are going smoothly from across.
And Jeff, not only that, the way that we use this, so this data is kind of organically comes from version 1 because there's dependencies that are managed on the Agile side. One of the big ways that we use this is when somebody moves out of a release because of their own, right? They have reasons that they need to move. We find the other people that have a dependency, and we can at least ask the question and say, if Jeff moves out of this release, can you still go in safely? And sometimes the question is no. And so now we can move them, because we've seen in the past, I'm sure everybody on this call has, that situation happens, and then the other guy goes into production, and what happens? It blows up because a dependent component's not there. So we're able to say, oh, wait a minute, these 3 guys are dependent. Let's move them all.
It's perfect. So a lot of things, if you have to produce compliance reporting, we can do that out of the box. You don't have to worry about it anymore. We'll give you lots of metrics. The point is, we're a value stream management platform. All this data rolls into an analytics warehouse. You can report on it. We've got an embedded Tableau. We've got a lot of dashboards out of box. We converge the tool chain by connecting it all together. We've got a lot of other techniques and technology around managing deployments and the environments and stuff just to help the process to make it smoother, to get out of being reactionary to being an enabler to all the dev teams at that point. We're out of time, so I better turn it back over to you.
I'm really sorry, folks, to have to cut this great discussion off. Thank you all so much. You will see a little pop-up on your screen. Please go ahead and get your copy of the Evolution of the Release Manager. That is there for you, and it is awesome. I went ahead and drew our 4 Amazon gift card winners here. And our winners for this session are Bruce T, Emily H, Sagar K, and Yuri M. Congratulations to you all. To the entire audience, the session has been recorded. We'll send you an email with instructions for accessing the webinar on demand. Please check your inbox and your spam folder. And for our Amazon winners, we'll send you a separate email with instructions for claiming those gift cards. Thank you to Jeff, Helen, and Tony, as always, for an amazing session. Always love to do these with you guys. And to the audience, thank you for spending your time with us today. We hope to see you again on another DevOps.com webinar. And that is it for me. I am Sharon Florentine signing off.
Bye, everybody.